Although he's not well known, Eric Wasley was an interesting figure in Muskoka history. Born and raised in Gravenhurst, he eventually became manager of the steamship line and later its owner. He wasn't able to hold on to it for long, though, as his near-perfect life was suddenly overturned by a tragic event and financial ruin. The Wasley family first came to Gravenhurst in the late 1870s, when Frank Wasley, Eric's grandfather, began operating the Albion Hotel. The original wooden structure was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1887, but Frank Wasley had a new hotel built, this time made of fire-resistant brick, and carried on for many more years. This Albion Hotel still exists today and is an important landmark in Gravenhurst. Frank's son William, or Bill, grew up around the hotel and helped out there as a young man, but he decided not to remain in the family business. Instead, he left town to attend the Ontario Business College and later returned back to Gravenhurst and took a job at the local foundry as a bookkeeper. This didn't last for long, though, and he soon found himself working as a crew member on one of the Muskoka steamships. He worked his way back to that type of work, however, first becoming a purser on the boats, and then an assistant in the company offices. In 1905, after the death of A.P. Coburn, the founder of the steamship line, Wasley was promoted to become the new general manager, a position that he then held for the next 35 years. Eric Wasley, Bill's son, was born in March of 1909. Because of his father's job, he must have been brought into contact with the steamboats at an early age, and just like any boy, he was probably thrilled to spend time around them. Eric began working on the boats, doing whatever he could. Of course, he was still in school then, but since the steamboats only operated in the warmer months, they were perfect for summer jobs. Living in Gravenhurst, Eric attended school there, including 2 years at the local high school. After this, however, it was decided to send him away to a boarding or a prep school. He then spent 2 years at the Trinity College School in Port Hope. For a small-town boy, this must have broadened his horizons, bringing him into contact with the sons of a lot of well-off families. In this photo of one of the cricket teams, we see Eric in the upper left. This picture was taken in 1928, which would have been his senior year. After leaving there, Eric continued his education at Trinity College in Toronto, part of the U of T. He was probably taking courses toward a general arts degree, and he stayed at Trinity College for at least 3 years. It's not clear, however, that he actually graduated, since there's no later reference to him having a degree. This wasn't unusual at the time, though plenty of people left college without graduating. While at Trinity College, Eric joined one of the fraternities there, Phi Kappa Sigma, and he can be seen in this photo from the 1932 yearbook in the back row, third from the left. Over the years, Wasley had various jobs on the boats, working his way up the ladder. Like his father, he would have started off as a deckhand and had dirty jobs like loading coal onto the boats. Like his father, he later became a purser and began wearing a uniform, although he apparently still occasionally pitched in with moving coal even then, as we can see in this photo. After leaving school, Eric wasn't restricted to working in the summers anymore, and he began helping out in the office as well. But he still served as an officer on board the boats. And in the spring of 1935, he received his mate's certificate. From then on, he served as the first mate, which made him the second in command, on Sagamo. This was quite a prestigious position for a young man still in his 20s. He can be seen in these photos with the rest of the Sagamo's crew. Although Eric was happy working for the steamship line, the seasonal nature of the job made it less than a full-time occupation. Consequently, Eric decided to become a lawyer and returned to Toronto to study at Osgoode Hall. He graduated from there in the spring of 1938. And in this photo of that year's graduating class, you can see him in the lower left. In November, he was called to the bar, and soon after that, he opened an office in Gravenhurst and began his law practice. Ads like this one appeared weekly in the Bracebridge Gazette newspaper for the next several years. It's hard to say how busy Eric was at this time, but his new profession certainly didn't stop him from helping out his father at the steamship line, where he served as assistant manager. Beginning in early 1940, Bill Wasley's health began to decline, making it hard for him to do his job. At first, Eric took over most of his duties and became acting manager. But in March of 1941, with no improvement to his condition, Bill Wasley was forced to leave his position, and Eric was made the official manager of the steamship line. He was actually quite well suited to the job, having had lots of experience on both the boats and in the office, and making him familiar with both aspects of the business. During the war, Eric Wasley did a good job of keeping the boats running on schedule, and there weren't any major problems. Although business had been decreasing in recent years, the war actually brought a moderate boost in steamboat travel, which was a result of wartime measures like gasoline rationing. Afterwards, however, things began to change again. Just after the 1945 season wrapped up, the Muskoka Navco's president and majority stockholder decided to sell out and retire. With the new president coming on board, more changes were likely to follow. Fortunately, Eric was kept on as manager, and the new president gave him a seat on the board of directors. As time went on, however, Eric began to have doubts about the direction the business was taking. As its official name indicates, the Muskoka Lakes Navigation and Hotel Company was made up of two divisions. While Eric Wasley was manager of the steamship line, the company's hotel assets, including the famed Royal Muskoka Hotel, were handled by someone else. Wasley came to believe that the new president was actually more interested in the hotel business, and that the steamship line was consequently being neglected. Around the start of 1949, Wasley made an important decision. He offered to buy the steamship line and run it himself as an independent business. Probably seeing that it was less profitable, the Muskoka Navco accepted his proposal, and before long, Eric Wasley was the owner of his very own fleet of steamships. The new business was named the Muskoka Lakes Line Limited, and Wasley agreed to a price of $150,000 with a down payment of $50,000. He put up the majority of the money himself from his personal savings, and raised the rest from various friends and investors. For this sum, he got the 5 boats that were still operational, a few vehicles and other goods, and also some real estate, including the shipyard's property in Gravenhurst and the natural park on Lake Joseph. Despite the financial strain, Eric must have been very happy to acquire the fleet. Now he could run it as he wanted and try new ways of developing the business. As if this wasn't enough, at the end of April 1949, just as things were gearing up for the new season, Eric took another big step. He got married. Traveling to his alma mater in Toronto, he and his fiancée Patricia were wed at the chapel of Trinity College. A reception was held at the Royal York Hotel, and then they took the train to New York City for a quick honeymoon. Even more, only a week before this, Eric's sister Irene had gotten married to his good friend Norman Dixon. Dixon had also worked on the steamboats for years and had just taken on the role of secretary-treasurer for the new company. With so many things to celebrate happening so quickly, it must have been a very exhilarating time for them all. Everything was falling into place and the future looked bright. I can just imagine Eric Wasley standing at the front of one of his boats and shouting, "I'm the king of the world," just like in the movie. That probably didn't actually happen, but I'm sure that's how he was feeling at the time. Business was good in Muskoka that summer, and the season ended on an optimistic note. But elsewhere, a tragedy was about to happen. On the night of September 16th, a large ship named Noronic, which operated on the Great Lakes and carried hundreds of people, was docked in Toronto when a fire broke out. Little was done to alert and evacuate the sleeping passengers, and many of them died in their cabins. About 120 people perished that night, although at first the number was feared much higher. The loss of life was a shock, and the story was on the front page of the newspaper for days. In the aftermath of the Noronic fire, the government soon implemented stricter safety regulations for passenger ships, which included the Muskoka steamboats, at least those that carried at least 100 people. Before the start of the 1950 season, the new company had to spend several $1,000s to upgrade its fire equipment, hoses, extinguishers, etc. But this was a manageable expense. Things were still going well, and in August the Wasleys welcomed their first child, a son, with a daughter born about a year later. On top of all that, Eric decided to run for mayor that fall, and he nearly got elected, coming in a close second. You would think he had enough to do already, with the company and the law practice, but apparently he was confident that he could handle the job of mayor too. The repercussions of the Noronic fire were not finished yet, however, and in February of 1951 the government announced even further requirements for the ships, including the installation of sprinkler and alarm systems and even some structural upgrades. Wasley and Company were now looking at an additional expense of $40,000, an impossible amount. A larger or longer established company may have been able to do it, but Wasley was still deep in debt from the purchase, and he had no other resources to draw upon. The financial problems soon became public knowledge, and many Muskokans were concerned that the steamship line would have to close down, which would be a terrible loss to the economy of the region. Public meetings were held, and various solutions were suggested and tried. Getting some kind of exemption from the government, finding new investors to provide the money, or even accepting donations from the general public. But none of these really worked out, and in early May, just before the new season was about to begin, Eric Wasley abandoned hope and declared bankruptcy. Because it wasn't fully paid for yet, the fleet and other assets returned to the ownership of the Muskoka Navigation Company. After more lobbying, in June, the government was finally persuaded to relax its requirements enough to allow Sagamo and Seguin, at least, to operate that summer. The Navco was generous enough to rehire Wasley, but only as assistant to somebody else. Financially ruined and in a lesser job, Eric Wasley was now in a worse position than he was before he left. After only 2 years, his dream of owning the fleet was dead. For the next few years, Eric carried on at this job, all the while struggling to pay off his debts. The strain undermined his marriage, however, and his wife eventually left him. Understandably, he began to drown his sorrows in alcohol, and before long his health began to suffer. By this time, the steamboats weren't doing too well either. The closing of the railway line to the wharf and the loss of the mail contract in 1954 were making it very hard to turn a profit. So in early 1955, the Navco decided to sell off the fleet again. The new owner, a Gravenhurst businessman, recognized Wasley's unique qualifications and offered him the job of manager. This restored him to his former status, at least. But he was only on the job for 2 months before a bout of pneumonia put him in the hospital. In his weakened state, he was unable to recover from it, and on May 28th, Eric Wasley passed away at the age of only 46. Wasley's death was reported on the front page of the newspaper, and it was a shock to many. Widely known and liked by the community, Eric's funeral was well attended. His friends, no doubt, were saddened not only by his death, but by the way his life had fallen apart so suddenly, and through no fault of his own. Wasley at least was spared one thing. He didn't live long enough to see the final shutting down of the steamboat line, which happened just 3 years later.